Chapter 11. Sweat was the least of his problems, but his jumpsuit was drenched. Sam Dickerson panted for a moment and then wiped his sleeve across his brow. Inside S&R Black's cargo area, he and his squad mate, Private Dan Like, had already stacked and sorted dozens of crates. Provisions still had to be unloaded, the vacuum-packed pouches sorted and stowed in the galley machines, and the survival equipment tested once more before locking it all down. And they hadn't even begun working through the ammunition, small arms, and other equipment related to combat. In short, it had already been a damned long morning. Cartwright had announced over the comms that Calimura's team was finished with the equipment gathering. That meant once he and Like finished stowing the rest of the supplies already in the cargo area, Copenhagen and Murdoch would bring in more for them to go through. While they scanned the crates, looked through the inventories to double-check the contents, and finally stowed them, Dickerson had started to get uneasy. He was looking at provisions for a long trip, a long stay, and a long journey home. Moreover, it appeared that S&R Black was headed for combat in a big way. Training mission my ass, he thought. He hadn't said anything to Like because he didn't want to spook him. The man had never had a live round fired at him, although he was perfect in the ZG combat simulations. But all that training meant nothing if he froze. He wondered if Like or the others who had never experienced combat believed the official story. I hope so, he thought to himself, or Captain Dunn is going to have an entire ship filled with Marines doubting his every word. He'd considered telling Gunny his suspicions, but decided it was a bad risk. Cartwright would no doubt bristle and yell at him, maybe even take him to a private area and explain how Lance Corporals in this Marine Corps know better than to second-guess or question the orders they're given. Yeah, he didn't need Cartwright taking him to the proverbial woodshed. Worse, if Talby heard he'd ask those questions, the lieutenant might kick his ass. Dickerson grinned in spite of himself. That would be an epic fistfight. But the loadout was obviously not for training purposes. A training cruise consisted of maneuvers in ZG, vehicle and skiff flights, and usually blowing the shit out of something that just happened to be annoying the shipping lanes. Those missions didn't require 20,000 rounds of flechette ammunition, beam batteries, all the rescue gear that Black could carry, and an armory of small arms. Sending a fully outfitted and stocked S&R ship on a cruise was expensive as hell. Although Neptune was the largest sole Federation military complex in the universe, every piece of gear that wasn't produced on site had to be brought by cargo ships from Jupiter, and some of those ships had picked up the original cargo from Mars or Earth. It took months for cargo to leave Mars and arrive at Neptune, which was one of the reasons they received equipment every 6 standard months. If the base was fully operational and fully staffed, those deliveries would probably happen more frequently, but SF Gov would be flat broke in no time. The mining operations on the moons of Jupiter and now Saturn brought in the raw materials SF Gov needed for its factories in low Earth orbit, the Martian stations, and the burgeoning market for solar-capable spacecraft at the civilian shipyards floating near the asteroid belt. But delivering them all the way to Neptune was prohibitively expensive. Unless Atmo or Transorbital discovered a new resource cache between Uranus and Neptune, or Neptune and Pluto, he imagined Trident Station and the shipyards would remain mostly vacant and out of commission. He shook the thoughts away. Right now he had to focus on getting these goddamn provisions finished. He wiped another sheen of sweat from his brow. Space was cold. The hangar was cold. Inside S&R Black, it was boiling. Noble said they were running the last few life support checks. Wonderful time to do it. Space temperatures ran from extreme heat to absurd cold, depending on where you were, how much of the sun's light you received, and a whole host of other factors. The ship had to be capable of handling the multitude of environmental factors, or it would quickly become a tin can filled with corpses. But this was ridiculous. Noble was obviously trying to grill them like steaks. Like was sweating too. The big man's exposed arms dripped with it. His jumpsuit looked as though someone had thrown him in the deep end of a pool. Dickerson couldn't wait for the test to end. He heard a sound behind him and turned to face it. The rear cargo door trembled slightly. "Like?" he he said. His squad mate turned to him, eyebrows raised. They're getting ready to bring in the heavy stuff, assuming we ever get this shit sorted. Sounds like the grab plates just went off. Shit, Like said. They know just how much more we have to put away? This is ridiculous. Welcome to the S&R Black Company, rookie. Like twirled his middle finger in the air before flipping Dickerson the bird. Dickerson laughed. Gunny, he said through an open channel, we're still working on the provisions. We're not ready for the heavy stuff yet. The pause before Cartwright answered wasn't a good sign. Gunny didn't just blow up. He built up a huge head of steam before detonating like a nuke.
Yahweh, Allah, and Christ fucking wept. Hurry the hell up, Dickerson. I want to get into space sometime this month.
Gunny's voice was controlled, but a solar flare of rage floated just beneath the words. We're working as fast as we can, Gunny, but this is a lot of...
I don't give a good donkey damn, Dickerson. We have an entire pile out here waiting for you to finish your damn job.
Maybe if we had some help, Dickerson mistakenly said aloud. Pause.
Are you aware your comms are on?
Dickerson face-palmed before answering in a respectful, contrite voice. I am now, Gunny.
Good,
Cartwright said.
Because I'd hate to think you say things behind my fucking back. I'm sending you incompetents some help. If we weren't on a clock, I'd send everyone to the rec area to catch some THC while you two assholes spend the rest of the day in there. Now quit whining and get shit done.
Ah, Gunny, Dickerson said. He turned to Like. The young private was laughing. Go fuck yourself. Like held up his hands. Sorry, man. You really need to remember when you're on the comms. No shit, Dickerson said, and turned back to the last crate of provisions. He finished sorting the last few pouches and filling up the cabinets. Once he was finished, he turned back around and faced Callie Mira. Corporal? Dickerson said. Dickerson, she said, her brows furrowed. Gunny tells me you're having problems getting everything loaded. Not exactly problems, more like there's too much. Excuses, she said, her mouth twitching into the ghost of a grin. I brought some help. Her squad appeared at the cargo bay door and marched inside, the four of them looking as though they were trying to keep from laughing. Great, Dickerson said, glaring at the newly arrived nom-rates. You organizing this shit show? Callie Mira nodded, eyes glittering with mischief. What do you need? Arms and brains, but I'll settle for your squad anyway. Fuck you, Dickerson, Carbonaro said with a laugh. All right, Marines, Callie Mira said. Let's get to work before Gunny blows a gasket. They all pitched in. Eventually, even Copenhaver and Murdoch lent a hand. When Gunny finally boarded the ship, they had everything stowed but the support vehicle and the ZG skiffs. He stood with his arms crossed, lips set in a thin line, as he inspected the cargo bay. Seemingly satisfied, he made his way through the rest of the ship. The 8 nom-rates worked together to load the rays and the SV-52. Even with the grab plates off, it took an hour to get the vehicles situated. Once you were in space, moving around large equipment was simple, but if it wasn't properly stowed, when S&R Black fired its nuclear drives at full thrust, the G-forces would knock it around inside the cargo bay, possibly damaging the hull or simply breaking expensive equipment. Therefore, diagnostics had to be used to inspect every fasten point, every cable, and every connection to make sure nothing broke loose. The rays were relatively easy. It was the SV-52 that required all the effort. At least the life support checks had finished. Dickerson cooled inside his sweat-drenched jumpsuit. In a few more minutes, he'd be downright cold. His bio-nannies were already adjusting his metabolic rate to combat the cold. Little fuckers did a good job of increasing or decreasing the rate based on temperature, but if you were too hot, the only thing they could do was make you sweat. Once they finished locking down the SV-52, Callie Mira gathered the nom-rates in the galley's cramped space. They stood at ease, talking in hushed voices punctuated by the occasional laugh. Dickerson didn't have anything to say. He was goddamned exhausted and absolutely certain Gunny was going to pop in and raise hell. That was his job, after all. Pity he's so good at it, Dickerson thought with a smirk. Well, at least he knew what he was doing. At last, Gunny returned from his tour of the ship. The Marines stiffened a bit when he entered the galley, a cup of coffee in his hands. He sipped from the ZG mug and glared at Kalimura and the non-rates.
Everything stowed, Corporal?
Aye, Gunny.
You're absolutely sure? I don't want to repack this ship once we leave Neptune.
She didn't turn to the Marines to look for help. That was the right move. Dickerson knew he'd undress her right then and there if she so much as showed a hint of doubt. Gunny, these Marines worked their asses off and did a good job. If you find something not to your liking, then it's my fault. The galley fell into a suffocating silence while Gunny considered her statement. Dickerson fought the urge to smile. She'd played that very well. Not only did it leave Gunny nowhere to go, it also told the non-rates she was in their corner. About goddamn time you figure out that's how to lead, he thought.
Is that so?
Gunny asked. Aye, Gunny. Cartwright glared at her for a moment, took a sip of coffee, and then his eyes softened a bit.
According to my chronometer, it took us 6 hours to load Black. 6 hours of humping, diagnostics, sorting, and counting. I allotted 8 hours for this task, so your Marines beat my estimates. Next time you'll get 7 hours, and I expect it to be done in 5. Understood?
Aye, Gunny! The Marines yelled in return, Kalimura louder than everyone else in the galley.
Good. Go get some chow. Dismissed until briefing at 1700.
Hoo-ha, Black! They yelled.
Get the hell out of my hangar.
Kalimura turned to the Marines. You heard the Gunny. Dismissed. The non-rates turned and filed out of the ship, sorted by rank. Kalimura stayed behind. Dickerson wondered if she had something to say to Gunny in private, or maybe she was waiting for him to say something to her. Either way, he'd love to have access to their chat. Oh well, time to shower and eat. Chapter 12. The officers' mess was practically deserted. Dunn wasn't surprised. He and Talby sat at an empty table, cups of steaming coffee in their hands. Dunn covered his mouth, loosed a loud yawn, and smiled. Sorry, long night. Talby's bloodshot eyes told the same tale. No problem, sir. Now, what's the status on my ship? Talby rolled the cup between his hands. I'm sure Portuna's updated you on the cargo delivery. Dunn nodded. Yes, he did. Karenis as well. Sounds like Kalimura did a good job, as did Cartwright's squad. Well, we always know Gunny will get a task done, and done right. I think we can start entrusting the corporal to do the same. Point taken, Dunn said. He took another sip of coffee. Still think she's leadership material? Yes, I do, Talby said. Gunny says she operated with a completely different attitude today. Less arrogant, less cold, engaged more with the company as a whole. Dunn smiled. Was beginning to think we'd have to dump her after the mission. Glad I don't have to. As am I, sir. Talby connected his block to the table's built-in holo display. A diagram of S&R Black appeared. He pointed to the cannons in the cargo bay. So we're fully loaded. Before we go into stasis, we should make sure all the weapons have ammunition and that the rescue gear is prepped. I looked at your plan for the tow, the captain said. Considering we have no idea what shape the ship will be in, I think you did a good job. Whose squad do you have in mind for hooking them up? The lieutenant's face brightened into a grin. I figured we'd give Corporal Kalimura a shot at it. She'll have time to practice before we reach Mira. Practice? She's had plenty of time in the Sims. True, Talby said, but you know as well as I do that the real thing is completely different. Plus, this is a much larger ship than we're used to towing. That was no lie. Mira, even if she was only partially intact, was at least 5 times the size of the largest mining ship S&R Black had ever retrieved. Dunn wasn't sure an S&R had ever attempted to tow a craft that large. The good news, he said, is we should be able to construct a new scenario for the Sims based on our little excursion. Talby nodded. Exactly, sir. The bad news is we don't have one now. Wouldn't matter. We have no idea what state Mira is in. And even if we did, we still wouldn't know what stress fractures she has on the hull or other structural damage. It's going to take inspection and eyeballs. My thoughts too, Talby said. But she should be able to get her squad out there with the skiff and perform those tasks. At the very least, it will be great experience for her. Plus, his eyes glittered with mischief, Dickerson needs to be reminded of what real work is. Dunn chuckled. Dickerson, his biggest problem child and the best combat specialist in the company, even better than Gunny. He had an attitude that nearly always bordered on insubordination, and a record guaranteeing he'd never see an NCO rank again. The officers tolerated him, though, because of his skills and his ability to rally the troops when shit went bad. On Mars, he'd saved a lot of lives by ignoring or outright disobeying direct orders. Instead of receiving medals, he'd ended up in the brig. That would be good, but he's in Cartwright's squad. Right now he is. I talked to Gunny. We're going to switch him out. Dunn raised his eyebrows. Why would we do that to her? We do it, Talby said, because Gunny suggested it. No shit, Dunn said. No shit, sir. Gunny seems to think Dickerson will mind her and can help shore up that team a little bit. Who's moving to Gunny in exchange? Private Nero. Gunny doesn't want the corporal teaching him any bad habits, Talby said with a straight face. Dunn belly laughed, and then Talby joined him. That sounds like our Gunny. Aye, sir. With your permission, we'll announce the change in assignment before we leave station. Of course, Dunn said. The two men fell into an uneasy silence as they sipped their coffee. Dunn thought for a moment and then placed his mug on the table. James, when would you drop the bomb about Mira? Talby considered that for a moment. Captain, have you ever dreamed in stasis? Dunn shook his head. Not really, or rather, not that I remember. I imagine I did, don't we all? I remember some of them, fragments mostly. When I first traveled from Mars to Trident Station, he let the sentence die and then shook his head. Before I left Mars for the first time, I'd heard all the stories of stasis couch failures. I was also terrified of a possible hull rupture. That was right after the Levinson incident. That struck a chord. Dunn felt a prickle of goose flesh at the name. It was almost as famous as Mira. Levinson was a civilian transport that left Mars for Titan Station. During the journey, the AI malfunctioned or lost control, it was never established which, and strayed too close to the asteroid belt. One of the smaller rocks punctured the hole. The collision may have caused the computer systems to fail, or perhaps the AI had gone insane. Either way, the stasis cycles were ended. All the civilians aboard woke from stasis just in time to encounter decompression without a suit. Some of the bodies were still unaccounted for and probably floating inside the same belt that destroyed them. Anyway, Talby said, I had dreams of drowning and of being thrown out of an airlock. Damn, the captain said. Did the AI wake you? Talby shook his head. No, but I remember them. I didn't come out of stasis or resume conscious thought. They were just little scenes that played out with no rational or intelligible narrative threads. Just a bunch of images and feelings colliding and meshing. Dunn tapped his fingers against the mug before taking a sip. That's a little disturbing. Tell me about it, sir. I guess my point is this. If you tell them before we hit stasis, they're going to be thinking about the Mira the entire way there. The fact they're in stasis won't matter. The subconscious is going to be turning that one thought over and over again. Good point, Dunn said. Talby still had a look of fear in his eyes. James, are you afraid you're going to dream about Mira? He shrugged. Yeah, I guess I am, sir. She's tumbling in space without power, doesn't respond to hails, and has appeared like a wraith from the farthest journey humankind has ever attempted. He looked around to make sure they were alone before leaning forward. She shouldn't be here, he whispered. If the brass is so afraid that her very existence will set off solar unrest, we should just blow her up and pretend she never came back, sir. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair. Sorry if I spoke out of turn, sir. Dunn was speechless. He realized his mouth was open in surprise and closed it. He took a long breath before responding. We'll discuss that when we see what's what, James. I guess I understand where you're coming from, though. Talby waved a hand in the air. Sorry, sir, I should keep those kinds of thoughts to myself. I've known you a long time, Lieutenant. I've come to respect your opinion, especially when it concerns strategy and tactics. You go with your instincts, and sometimes, well, most times, you're right. I don't always agree with you, but I always listen. Yes, sir, you do. I'll take what you said under advisement, Dunn said. Thank you, sir. Dunn looked absently at his empty mug. I need more coffee. Talby downed the rest of the black liquid and clinked the mug on the table. I could use another cup, he said. The two men rose from the table and headed to the dispenser in silence. Dunn suddenly didn't want to talk to Talby anymore. He, too, wondered if he'd dream of Mira on the way to Pluto. The thought terrified him.